All right, we are now actually live. Apologies to everyone who's joining us online from YouTube. Amy's having kind of a frazzled day. I do apologize. Welcome again to QGIS Open Day, the second session. I think I may have been sneakily on a different stream that was actually for another session. So I do apologize. And sorry, Ethan, about that. We got about a minute or so into it. So I'll just catch everyone up on where we were. So we're going to just do a quick update on the QGIS processing nodes project. And that is, of course, an overhaul of the QGIS modeler, etc. So I'm really, really keen to see what's happening. And again, sorry for the quick technical difficulties there.
No problem. Okie dokie, round two. So yes, this is the QGIS Processing Nodes, or QPN, project update. My name is Ethan Snyder. I am a senior GIS GPS technician and software engineer with Remington and Furnick Engineers. So a little bit about me. As I said, I'm a senior GIS GPS technician. I actually have no formal GIS training in terms of college. I actually have a degree in software engineering. I sort of fell into the GIS world in about 2016. I learned about QGIS first with watching video tutorials with Gordon Luckett. I've been a FOSS advocate and trying to push QGIS in the workspace and also other open source tools. And I am a daily Linux user, where my distro of choice is Fedora KDE. So first off, what is QPN, or what is QGIS Processing Nodes? So QGIS Processing Nodes is a project that aims to make or take the QGIS graphical modeler and turn it into more of a node-based geoprocessing modeler. It is a very ambitious project, and it is inspired heavily by the Blender node systems. Blender is a 3D graphics, modeling, animation, and rendering software. And it has a lot of node interfaces for things like shader nodes, compositor nodes, geometry nodes, animation nodes, and other things potentially coming. So here's an example. First, this is a mock-up that I had made a few years back and presented at FOSS4GNA 2023 of what my vision would be for a node-based interface for QGIS. So here we have our favorite buffer tool. We have our inputs on the left side with these little sockets. We've got input widgets, and then we've got the outputs on the right. You would connect these together with noodles. And this is what Blender's node system looks like. Here's a geometry node setup. We've got the group input and outputs on the left and right side. We've got all these nodes in the middle that do various things. They take inputs, they have options, and then they have outputs. You then string these together with nodes or noodles to do what you want to do. And these nodes have different shapes, different colors, and these things all mean different things to help visualize and distinguish what kind of inputs and outputs are what. So you might be asking, why QGIS processing nodes? Why is this a thing? Why do I want to do this? What is the whole purpose of this? So especially since QGIS already has a graphical modeler, what is the whole purpose of this project? Well, one of the main goals is to add more flexibility to the graphical modeler. Add more modularity to things. Add more clarity to when you're making your models. Things are going to be more explicit as where inputs and outputs are going, where settings are coming from, if they're getting piped from other tools. Definitely adding more features than what the base graphical modeler currently has. Having this kind of system with more flexibility and modularity will also allow for more features. And in my totally unbiased, humble opinion, it just looks way cooler. So here's an example of what I have right now with the QGIS Processing Nodes editor. This is right now a standalone application that is not actually attached to QGIS. So here we've got a toolbox on the left side with our list of processing providers, then the groups, and then the actual algorithms that we have. And you add them to the canvas. And here is a nice collection of various processing tools from providers such as PDAL and QGIS. And, oh yes, also have some stuff from the Orfeo toolbox. There we go. So some notable differences with QPN and the built-in modeler. So it's primarily a noodle-based routing system versus instead of adding to node, getting that pop-up window and setting everything there in that modal pop-up window. There's also proposal for enhanced type system for showing providers, algorithms, inputs and output types, like what's expected input and output, a little more detailed than what QGIS currently has. Adding the ability to have dynamic UIs. A fun little topic called subnode groups. And more modeler-specific nodes and tools. Without needing to go into Python, it'll allow you to add more flexibility and power to the graphical modeler without having to go into Python. And then to provide a better processing model building UI UX. So it'll enhance the user experience for making our processing models. So I already did touch on the noodle-based routing. So now we're going to look at the idea of the enhanced type system. So here we have our beloved buffer tool. We got these multicolored and different shaped node sockets are on the left. These are all of our inputs. And what I want to do is add tooltips so that when you hover over each of these sockets, it'll give you information, but not just like the name, the ID, it's Python identifier, but also some more advanced information. We got the description, but also we've got some more specific geometry or data type information. Like for our input layer, the buffer tool accepts any kind of vector layer where it's point, line, polygon, has Z or M attributes. We've got the distance input, which is not just a numeric field, but is specifically a distance numeric field. And then we've got our buffered output. And no matter what input you give this buffer tool, it will always create a polygon output. Now, this is a bit trivial. For the most part, we know that buffer will always create a polygon, but sometimes for different processing tools, it might be helpful to know what kind of data type I'm expecting from the output. We can also use this information for verifying and validating to make sure that things are being connected in the right order, that we're giving things the proper inputs and outputs. Like, for instance, putting in a processing tool that outputs points, sending that points output into like an explode lines tool won't make any sense. So having this extended type system can help fix these kind of bugs with our graphical models. And I don't know if Hans van der Kwaast is going to be seeing this later, but this one's for him. Let's look at a more interesting processing algorithm. We've got the LDD create tool here from PC Raster Tools. And for those who are unaware, PC Raster Tools is a plugin that adds additional processing tools for hydrology modeling. And an interesting thing with PC Raster Tools is that it has its own raster format that it needs all the raster layers to be in. It's called the PC Raster format. So let's see what these tooltips look like. So we have our DEM layer and our local drain direction layer. But what is this? We're specifically saying that our input DEM is a raster of type PC raster and then of type scalar. So the PC raster data type that LDD create needs is a scalar PC raster format. And our output for our LDD create tool is PC raster.ldd, or the local drain direction. So these kind of tooltips are also going to be helpful of keeping track what kind of data types PC raster and other raster tools require. I know I don't use PC raster all the time, so it's kind of hard to remember which data types are for which. So now let's look at dynamic UI. So the concept of dynamic UIs is for processing tools whose inputs change depending on certain options chosen. This is a common thing for Saga tools, where a lot of the inputs, required inputs, will change depending on whether it's a method or some kind of other input parameter drop-down list will change the different kinds of inputs and outputs the processing tool will have. Well, right now, QGIS doesn't support that. So looking at this Saga Flow Accumulation tool for top-down, it has everything, all the inputs, all the outputs, and unless you're experienced with the tool, you're not going to know which inputs are required for which modes and which outputs are created for each modes. So the idea here is to allow dynamic UIs so that the UI will change depending on what inputs are chosen. Like for instance, with the flow accumulation top-down tool, there's a method drop-down. And if we switch the method to deterministic 8, a lot of these outputs disappear and also do some of the inputs. And then the same if we switch it to multi-flow direction. So being able to change the node's UI of what inputs or outputs shown will also help people use these tools, especially if they're not super familiar with them. So now we're going to take a look into subnode groups. So subnode groups is a nested model or submodel within a model. So here we have an example in Blender. We have this is a shader node example. We have a noise texture that is piping into this node that is also lovely named Hoopla. This Hoopla node is a subnode group. This Hoopla node we see has some inputs and some outputs. It has a scale input, a roughness input, and an IOR input. And then it outputs a BSDF material for rendering on an object. However, this is a subnode group. So what we can do is we can click on this Hoopla node and look into it and see that it itself is made up of other nodes. It's got, in this case, a noise texture node and then a principled BSDF node. And some of these inputs to these nodes are then exposed out to the main parent Hoopla node. So we have this noise textures, scale, and roughness values. We're passing that out so the user can easily modify those. And then the principled BSDF, we're passing the IOR out. And then the whole thing gets grouped out to the output BSDF. So this helps a lot with grouping and making things more modular. And of course, we can expose some of these internal parameters. Like for instance, if you've got a processing model that's got a fairly strict, for instance, like buffer distances, that might not be something you want to expose to the user. But there might be some other things you want to expose to the user. So you'll take those inputs and expose those. So let's see, what are some uses in QGIS for subnode groups? So we have, obviously, groups as already mentioned, but there's some other features that I don't know if anyone might be interested in. Would anyone be interested in iterators by any chance in a graphical modeling context? To iterate over each vector feature or vector feature part, vector raster layers in an array or group of layers, iterate over attributes and fields, iterate over each raster band in a raster. These might sound a little useful.
Yeah, they sound somewhat useful. I think some people might use those.
Yeah. But I'm not sure. I'm not an expert here. I don't know if people want to iterate over anything or not.
I love in the live comment, Sebastian just is like, yes.
Iterators are a common thing I've heard are a missing feature that people would love to have in QGIS.
Oh, we've got a couple more yeses coming in on the live chat.
Yeah, so this is something that we definitely want to focus on getting in.
Brilliant.
And then we've got this other concept called subtools. So but first, here's an example of some mock-ups I have made for some iterator stuff. So I've got a for each feature where it'll take a vector feature, and then inside of this node, it'll expose an individual feature. You can do whatever you want to it. And I also have these, you'll notice there's some on each of these that says add new context. You can drag and add other data layers or information into this for each. It'll be exposed as like almost like a static variable that you can reference and access while inside this iterator. So we've got the for each feature, we've got for each vector layer. That'll take multiple vector layers and iterate over each one of them. And then we have for each raster band. If you have a multi-band raster layer that you want to do the same process on for each band, you can do that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about subtools. This one's also a really fun one along with iterators. So subtools are model nodes with an embedded node system in it that is specific to a particular tool. The main example and the initial real motivation behind this idea of subtools is for PDAL pipelines. Because right now, if you want to do PDAL pipelines with your point clouds, you have to go and write up a JSON file, and then through the command line, run that JSON file through PDAL pipeline with your input and output, which means you have to leave QGIS to do it. We also have a GDAL.
In the live chat, Cthulhu says, Cthulhu 510 says that we won't have to open a node dialog to edit the properties.
Correct.
Nice. And then I just have one last. G. Joe says, this feels like visual programming and would like to volunteer to help with the UI UX. So hit him up.
Yes, thank you. Could definitely use some help with this. So brilliant. We got GDAL's new pipeline feature that they recently released with their new command line interface. And we got some potential other things too, not just for these JSON-based things that are external, but also for something internal. Like maybe you'd want to have a subnode tool for working with raster calculators graphically, with individual nodes for things like adding, subtracting bands and such like that. That's just an idea. But it can also be used for more complex algorithms. So for instance, right now, QGIS processing nodes has a blacklist of current processing nodes that it's not able to display due to various issues. One of which is the TIN interpolation tool. And that's because the whole user interface for the TIN interpolation tool is actually a single input widget. And it's a special custom input widget. So we would need to figure out how to actually get this tool into a node-based processing environment. So one idea is to use it as a subnode or a subtool node, where you'd have the parent top-level node of TIN interpolation. You would drag in all your context layers that you'd want to add for the TIN interpolation. And then inside that node, you would have separate nodes for extracting out, for this layer, I want to use the Z value for the points. For this layer, I want to use the elevation that's stored in this attribute for this layer, etc., like you can in the interface. But being able to do that in a graphical node environment for tool chain and process modeling. So first, let's look at how this is going to work with PDAL pipeline. So you have at your top level of your model, you would add your PDAL pipeline node. You would drag in the input you want, whether it's a raster file or if it's a point cloud, you'd add that in. And then you would enter into the PDAL pipeline and you'd add in all of your various readers, writers, and filters that you want to do. You would chain all these together however you see fit. And then you would drag out the final result to the group output node, which would then add a new output to your top level PDAL pipeline node that you could then continue into the chain of your QGIS processing. So behind the scenes, what this will do when you go to run this processing model is it'll take the contents of the PDAL pipeline and it'll compile it down into the pipeline JSON file and then call PDAL pipeline with that JSON file. And a fun takeaway from this is that this can also be used as a graphical editor to create PDAL pipeline files. If you have a server environment and you want to be processing a bunch of point clouds headless on a remote server, you can use QGIS to generate what your pipeline would be, export out the JSON file, and then upload that JSON file to the server, and voila, not having to edit JSON directly into text editor.
Yay.
I figured some people would like that. So for some modeler-specific tools, I would like to add a lot of utility and helpful tools for use in a modeler environment. We've got, as obviously mentioned, iterators, because otherwise you'd have to do your processing scripts in Python if you wanted to do iterators, if you needed to iterate over things within the model. Conditionals and switches, if you want to have branching, data and layer information, like, I don't know, maybe like feature count, layer extents, raster and band information. Constants. This one's an interesting one. So we can have constants for things such as like point cloud classification codes. Like, oh, I can't remember which classification number is for roads. I don't know. Let me add this constant node. It'll have a drop down of the verbal meaning of the codes. Like, oh, I'm looking for road, go to classification, drop down, hit road. And the output of that node will be the number that classification is, that you can then use as an input back in PDAL, for instance, of like extracting out a particular classification. And converters, you can convert between certain convertible types. So here's some concepts I made up for an if block. That takes an input data stream, whether it's whatever it is, if it's a vector layer or something. And depending on the result of a Boolean condition, it'll send that out to a true path or a false path. Of course, now we have with the issue of branched execution is that how do we join them back together? If, for instance, we have two different branches, we need to then join them back together for another processing. Like, I need the result of either one of these to then be the input into one node. Well, a node can't have multiple inputs if it doesn't accept multiple inputs. So I have a branch joiner here that sort of works as almost like the coalesce does for the QGIS expressions, where it just returns the first non-null result, but it'll output it out as just a single output. So no matter which input you give it ends up being the one that's run. The input you can then use for your next node or tool in the chain would just be the branch joiner's output as a single output. So I'm going to talk a little bit about UX improvements that I have planned. So let's say I have this model representing some super duper large complex model. And during testing, I find out that I don't really need this multi-part to single part tool, as it really slows down the process for these stupidly large data sets I'm running it on. And turns out most of the data sets I'm needing to run this with are not multi-part. So this is unnecessarily slowing down my processing chain. But the issue is right now, I just can't simply delete this node because this shows up. So one of the goals of QPN is to improve user experience and get out of the way of the user to work and make the processing model toolchain that they want to do. It's like, I'm in here, I'm in the graphical modeler, I'm working on editing the model, let me just delete the stupid thing and I'll reconnect things however I see fit. Just let me do what I want to do. So one of the things is definitely to be able to easily and effortlessly just delete nodes, let us go in and reconnect things so things connect again, minimize the amount of modal or blocking errors that keep you from doing things, preferably remove them as much as possible. Definitely have warnings and let people know that there's issues. Like if I go and delete that node, at least give me a warning in a non-intrusive way that says, hey, you now have a disconnect. Definitely add explanations to things so we know why there's warnings, what the warnings mean. There are, I will say, certain other large GIS companies in which the explanations are quite vague and not helpful whatsoever. So here we have once again, our beloved buffer tool. And because he's just floating out here in the middle of space with nothing, absolutely nothing connected to him, one of the ideas is to have this little yellow triangle thing that just sits in the corner, lets you know, hey, there's some warnings or some issues with this node. You go to hover on it, and it'll bring up the tooltip that says, hey, warnings. You have a required input layer, that's not plugged into anything. You're not providing this any input. And it's required input, so this node can't run properly. And another fun warning that, hey, the output to this tool, the output buffered layer, you're not using it anywhere. Why am I buffering something if you're not going to use it? And then at the bottom, we have another note because, this guy's just floating out in space that says, hey, this algorithm will not be run as it's not connected to anything. So if you're building your model and you're wondering why isn't my output buffered, you go into the model and you see, oh, duh, it's not connected to anything. So it's not going to be executed.
Yes.
So we do have a bit of a very, very loose, rough project outline and timeline of what the plans are for this project.
Mm-hmm.
So currently we are here in the proof of concept phase. And the timeline for this phase is QGIS version 3 through 4. Basically, the whole purpose of this phase is to figure out, does this kind of UI UX for graphical modeling make sense? Will this work in the context of QGIS? I know in a recent QEP, Niall Dawson has commented that he doesn't think Blender's node type system will work for QGIS. Well, that's why we're here in the proof of concept to figure that out. Will this work? Will this not work? I hope it does. I think a lot of other people hope it does. Of course, also node design, figuring out how we want the nodes to look, the socket design, their shapes, their colors, what's going to mean what, because we also want things to be consistent so it's not confusing. A big thing is going to be the dependency graph, which is a graph of all the algorithms that you have in your model, so it knows what to execute when, so nothing's done out of order, like a Windows update. Microsoft could really use a dependency graph and make sure updates are installed in the proper order. Definitely want to figure out subnode groups, getting those worked. The best part about proof of concept stuff is software architecture, is being able to just overhaul the whole thing without having to worry about API or ABI breaks, because it's all proof of concept. Let's burn the whole thing down and start again. Also, along with that is R&D. Any of the research and development we want to do, anything we need to completely refactor, overhaul, ditch, and build again, now's the time to do it. And another thing we definitely want to do is have file format set up for this and being able to read and write, not just for QGIS processing nodes, but what would also be nice is be able to read existing QGIS model files, the Model 3 format, being able to read that in and open existing QGIS graphic models into QPN, seeing if there's any features we're missing. So the next step would then be potentially a QGIS plugin. This would definitely be in QGIS version 4, because this means it'd be required to be in Qt6. We don't want to be having to split across Qt5 and Qt6. Just have it Qt6. We definitely want to have most of the algorithms to be implemented and present to be able to work. Exceptions might be the weird esoteric things like the tin interpolation. We want to have most of the features available to the users. And this is the biggest phase for user feedback. It's going to be as a plugin. The general public is going to be able to see it, use it, work with it, break it. We want to try and see if we can get some QPN wrappers. Who knows? Maybe this is where the tin interpolation might come in. It might not. And of course, the ability to import existing graphical models. And if anyone here is watching, is sitting on the project steering committee, hold on for just a minute. Let me say everything first. Okay. Don't know why that's showing up. But eventually,
I'll give you a story time afterwards. Okay.
Yeah. So an idea is to get eventually put it into QGIS core. The timeline would be either late QGIS 4 or QGIS 5. And the idea behind putting it into core would be at least it would be first alongside the existing graphical modeler. It'd be porting the Python code over to C++, which would give less overhead, not having to go through all the layers of abstraction. And of course, as this thing decided to show up before, leads to better performance with it being a compiled language versus interpreted. The goal at this point would definitely be one-to-one feature parity with the built-in modeler. There would potentially be new core features into QGIS core to help support this. And yes, here we go. This would most definitely, absolutely be through a QEP process. I'm just not going to just yeet a merge request in the middle of left field one day for this. This would most definitely go through a QEP process. And potentially, again, all depends. This is dependent on a whole lot of stuff. This is just hopes and dreams right now. Would be the deprecation but not removal of the existing built-in graphical modeler. And then finally, we would have whatever version that gets implemented +1. The built-in modeler would then get removed where QPN would fully replace it. There would potentially be a new API for the graphical modeler because this would be a whole new system. I do believe Niall said that the current API is a mess at the moment. So I'm guessing this would be a welcome change. There'd be more features for the graphical modeling process. There'd be new subtools. There'd be the new features in core to help back some of this up. The concepts and ideas like the dynamic user interface for the nodes and the enhanced type system will most likely have to be stuck waiting for either porting to core or the potential addition of new features in core when in the plugin phase to support it. Because right now it's just limitations with the existing API that QGIS has. So with any project, I've got a mile-long to-do list. This is still most definitely a proof of concept, and there's a lot of work to do before the proof of concept is done. If you haven't noticed from any of the screenshots, all of my screenshots are missing the noodles. That's because I haven't done that yet. So to-do number 1 is implement the noodles. Finalize the node socket design, figure out input widgets, the socket shapes, the socket colors. Another big one is the dependency graph. One of the end goals for the proof of concept is to be able to at least, quote unquote, run the model. And what running it would do would just print out in like a JSON or something of the order of execution that each of the processing tools would be run in with their inputs. So we could verify and see, is everything running in the correct order? Implement subnode groups. This is definitely a big feature that I really, really want. So that's definitely a big to do. Implementing the looping constructs. This goes along with the subnode groups. And probably the biggest hurdle is how to deal with and handle expressions. And not just expressions, but also the expression context. When you go to create and edit an expression, there's a bunch of context of everything upstream, being able to pull all that in for context so you can make a nice expression of whatever you need to do. So that one is going to be probably the biggest challenge, is figuring out the expressions. So with that, thank you much. I'm sure people have lots of comments, questions, concerns, moans, groans, and gripes.
And stories, apparently.
Ah.
All right, so there is one comment, just sorry, I've only seen it now. I think it refers to a couple of slides back. But Hruneb says, deleting nodes is already possible, but you have to manually reconnect first and then delete, which is basically the same as deleting first and then reconnecting the outputs and inputs.
Yeah.
And
But you got to reconnect everything first, then delete the node. The idea is to let's go back over here. I just want to delete this thing and just delete it first. Like, the fact that I have to go and repath everything first is a bit of an annoyance. Just let me delete the thing and then I'll work on repathing. Because here's the thing. What's going to happen is sometimes when I go to delete, like for instance, this multi-part to single part, suppose I want to replace it with a different tool. I'll delete the multi-part to single part. I'll add a new tool in, and I'll be reconnecting it that way when I go to add the new tool.
Alrighty, cool beans. Then Hruneb also mentions dependencies should also be user-defined, like it is now in the model designer, as a comment.
I think referring to different kind of dependencies.
Oh, I see.
So let me go over to the Blender one because we have some noodles shown here. So let me see if I can get a cursor or something. Can you see my cursor?
No. Yes. You just moved it. I can see it.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. So let's say we have this tool here, the set handle type tool. This guy has a dependency on set spline type. The set spline type has a dependency on resample curve, and so on and so forth. Let's go a little more complicated. This capture attribute tool has a dependency on both curve line and spline parameter. This curve line has a dependency on both of these combined XYZs, and this one has a dependency on subtract. So in order to execute this capture attribute, it needs to first know both curve line and spline parameter. But in order to execute curve line, it needs to know both of these. So it's pretty much just needing, when it comes to the dependency graph, is mainly just referring to the order of execution for the model. Of this guy, in order to execute capture attribute, value gets evaluated first, then subtract. Then either one of these doesn't really matter. These can be in either order. And then this guy, and then the spline parameter, and then we can get to the capture attribute. Because if I try and compute the curve line before either one of these combined XYZs, there's going to be a problem. So that's what the dependency graph is that I'm referring to.
Alrighty, cool. Cthulhu 510 says, looks really cool. Sebastian mentions that he remembers talking to you about this at PhosphoGNA in Baltimore a few years ago, and he's really glad to see that you're going for it.
Yep, that's what this guy's from.
Brilliant. And then I also see Gijo 3756 says, is there a GitHub repo we can hop in and check this out?
Yes, I completely forgot to add that to the PowerPoint.
Don't worry, the community will remind you.
Yes, 1 second. Let me see here.
While you pull that up, I see Unicom says, having built a water balance calculator in the modeler recently, any improvement to the workflow is going to be very welcome. All right, B says, then we're talking about the same thing, but hang on, this is already a setting in the model designer, so just an improvement. Okay, cool.
Let me see. Let me add a text box here. Paste. Oops, this guy.
I'm not seeing your screen anymore.
Okay. Thank you, Wayland. 1 second.
Then Sebastian mentions that with Blender, the outputs are dynamic. Could there be the ability to have virtual layers that are generated by the model similar to expressions? Ah, there's the GitHub. Thank you.
Yep. For the most part, it's going to operate under the. Well, this is pretty much just sitting on top of the modeler, so to speak, because it's still working on the QGIS processing framework. So when it comes to virtual layers and stuff, yes, all the outputs are going to be handled as temporary memory layers. And if you want an output of something to be a temporary memory layer, then the user interface window that you get when you go to actually run the thing, just keep it as temporary output. Unless I'm missing something.
I don't think so. They're also wondering if this visual system could be used in expressions. Actually, that'd be really cool.
Definitely not today.
No, it's just for someone like me. I'm much better at like visual programming than making an expression. So it would be really cool if I could make them like that.
Potentially. It's certainly not on the immediate roadmap, but that's something that could always be potentially added later.
Hey, you opened with blue sky thinking.
Yeah. Anyone want to see a demo?
And then, pardon?
Anybody want to see a demo?
Yeah, let's go for it.
We love demos, don't we? What could possibly go wrong? Good news is not much. So right now, all the development is happening outside of QGIS. So this is just a standalone PyQt5 application. So what I did in order to get all of these processing algorithms was I just wrote a basic Python script that sort of went through the Python or the processing registry and just dumped everything into a JSON file. Now, of course, I didn't dump enough of the information of the API into the JSON file. So that's why if I were to go over here to QGIS, vector geometry, and hit buffer, I don't have anything for any of my enumerations. I don't have any default values for any of these because I did not bother to get that information from the API first. So, but anyways, this at least gives you a nice picture of the general look and feel of it. This is also not using any of the custom QGIS widgets. Like, for instance, I think they have, like, for distance, there's no extra widget here drop down for distance units. This is just a numeric double spin box. So we've got all the processing providers here. I ran this on my work computer, which has a lot of stuff. We got OTB, PC raster. None of the hovers and tooltips are working. That was all mock-up in LibreOffice Impress or PowerPoint. However, for the Poodle stuff, this was all hand done, all hand added by me for this. So everything here, all of the drop downs are actually there because I put those in. Default values are in. Of course, right now there's no actual subnode groups. So right now the Poodle filters and stuff are in the same place as regular QGIS buffer. That's not how this is actually going to work eventually. What's going to happen is like you have your regular QGIS model. You'll take your over in Poodle, take your Poodle pipeline, and then you're going to be entering into this node and you'll get a blank canvas with an input and output group. Actually, I should show something sort of like these. You'll have these, and then you'll add like sort of like these on this side. And inside the Poodle pipeline node, you will just see Poodle, filters, readers, and writers, and anything else Poodle pipeline internal related. So you'll just have these, and when you're outside of it in regular QGIS model land, you will not see the Poodle pipeline readers, writers, and filters. So the toolbox will be context aware. Right now, it's not, because I don't have that context set up yet. So right now you can just sort of drag and drop, add some things. I don't think I have drag and drop, but double click on something and add something. Right now you can't delete anything. I don't have that implemented yet. But it's a nice little playground of dragging some stuff around, seeing visually if anything's broken like it currently is.
It's like an interactive wireframe. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not sure if it comes across, but the bottom edge here is a little messed up.
A little bit. I can see it's a bit sort of janky.
Yeah. Somehow when I completely decided to overhaul how the algorithms and nodes interacted with each other, I must have broken something.
I see Gijo mentions that Dynamo is a fully featured and mature node workflow and is worth checking that out.
Thank you. I will. So does anybody have any other comments, questions, concerns, moans, groans, or gripes?
I'm interested in Tim's story time. Shall I grab some chips?
So I'm in a kind of noisy place now. So I don't know if it's the best time to tell stories, but I was going to say that in QGIS's history, we have had, we jokingly sometimes call it the drunk GIS because we have two of everything. We had like symbology version 1. And then at some point we decided, or Martin Gabiash decided we needed a new version of symbology V2. And so for a time we had both symbology V1 and V2 available and you could switch between them. And we've had various other things through the life of the project which have been duplicated and pretty much following that same pattern where you add the second one in beside the first one while you're perfecting the second one. And then when the second one is good, you get rid of the first one. So you're treading new ground, but also treading same old ground that we've walked before. And I think it's a pretty good approach. And I look forward to playing with your new processing V2. But I almost want to say that the current processing is V2 as well, because I think there was an overhaul, but I could be getting all my memory all muddied up and confused. That's the end of my story for now because it's too noisy to tell you. But another time I'll tell you the long version. Yeah.
This feels like I'm naming my files. This is V1. This is V2. This is final V2. This is real final V2.
Well, in a way, QPN itself is going to have like 3 versions. You got the proof of concept is in a way, this what you're looking at is like V1. And then the Python plugin is going to be V2. And if it decides to move into QGIS core, that would be V3. Unless the project steering committee decides once like the proof of concept here is all done, they like it enough, they'd rather just get it into core. So, okay, we can do that.
I just had a question because I'm aware of time now. We're starting to run low.
Yes.
So I wanted to know, there are a couple of people who obviously have volunteered to get involved a little bit. So where would be best to contact you for that? Can they get to you in contact on the channel, or shall they just pop into the GitHub that you shared and pop you a note?
Yeah, that works.
Do you mind bringing the GitHub link on the screen so that we can just make sure that folks have it? There we go. Perfect. So I see it's called QGIS Processing Nodes. Great.
Yep. I'm also on the regular GIS Discord server. You can find me there. Again, the QGIS Telegram. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Is it cold over there?
I was gonna say as well, just one thing that you mentioned a few times about the PSC. Generally, we don't like. Well, I mean, there are some cases where we might poke our nose into like code matters, but generally we're there to facilitate like the smooth running of the project, but not to make like technical decisions too much about which lines of code get accepted into the code base. That's what the developers like Niall and all the other core committers are there for.
Yeah, this is also like a big project. It's not like a little like modification or a even like Niall's profile elevation profile tool is, I would say, fairly minor versus like this big project. This is like overhauling the whole graphic modeler kind of thing. This is like going in. Not sure if people are aware of stuff going on in the United States, but President Trump demoed the East Wing of the White House and is adding a giant ballroom. This is kind of what this is doing to the graphical modeler, coming in with a giant like wrecking ball.
Did he use QGIS in the process or?
Internally.
I don't know. Probably not.
Alrighty, great stuff. So if there are no other last comments, I'm going to bring this session to a close. I'm just aware that Jitsi might cut our live stream off at exactly the hour, so I'd like to bring in any of our last questions before we wrap up. Alrighty. No other notes on the live chat. Thank you to everyone who has been interacting.
Just to say, keep on all the Imagineering and pioneering and bringing new ideas to the table. It's great to see what you're doing.
Thank you.
Really cool. Alrighty, great stuff. Then thank you, Ethan. I really appreciate it. And I'm so keen to see how this project goes and what you come up with. I think a couple of updates as we go would be really cool.
Yeah, and I don't know how often they're going to be. I don't want to be, like constantly shoving updates all the time.
No,
but I know the last is the Phos4G 2023 or NA 2023 one in Baltimore. That was a 5-minute lightning talk of a very high level overview concept of what I wanted. And now, like 2 years later, I have something. So who knows? Maybe in another 2 years, the PSC might be a smidge closer. Might have noodles by then.
Brilliant stuff. All right, thank you everyone for joining this month's QGIS Open Day. I will be discussing next month's QGIS Open Day on the Telegram channel and the various groups. I think it may need to be a little bit earlier in the month, just because I'm away over the festive season. But I'd like to have maybe a festive mapathon or something where the whole community can come together and we can just do some fun year-end mapping with QGIS. So I'll put out some feelers, talk to the different teams, and I will let everyone know the date of the next QGIS Open Day.
Thank you to you, Amy, and the Open Day team for all the great work you've done through the year and being here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And hopefully we can carry on in the next year, but I'm keen on the festive year-end, just some general checking out of QGIS and what's all happening. Alrighty, brilliant stuff. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend. Cheers all. Alrighty, our stream is closed. Thank you.